Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into something pretty fascinating. The really dramatic change in how U.S. President Trump is seen inside Russia.
That's right. We're going to explore this shift, especially considering recent diplomacy, recent rhetoric.
Yeah, looking at the initial expectations, some surprising turns, and maybe what it all shows us about, global relations.
We'll try to unpack the nuances here, how the Russian public and political circles, too, have reacted to what U.S. President Trump has been doing lately.
And what that reaction tells us about the dynamics between, the two countries.
Exactly.
So let's start with a pretty big development concerning Ukraine. U.S. President Trump, who, said before he wanted to end the conflict fast.
Right, quickly.
He seems to be, losing patience with the Kremlin. On Monday, July 28th, he announced a huge cut to that previous 50-day ultimatum for peace talks.
Yeah, a big cut.
He said Russian President Putin now has just 12 days to get a truce done.
But what's really crucial to grasp here is that despite this ultimatum, Moscow hasn't shown any sign, any indication at all of easing up its offensive in Ukraine.
Still going.
Oh, yeah. Reports point to almost nightly bombardments, cruise missiles, drones, the works. So this steadfastness from Russia, it's a constant factor.
And interestingly, even folks in Washington who've historically backed Russia or, pushed for friendship with Russian President Putin, they haven't really opposed sending more weapons to Kyiv this time around.
That is interesting.
Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, he kind of doubled down on the president's seriousness on July 29th. Said on social media something like, anyone in Russia thinking U.S. President Trump isn't serious about stopping the fighting, they'll soon be deeply mistaken and should basically get to the peace table.
Wow, okay. Strong words.
So, okay, let's unpack this a bit more.
Right.
This transformation, this change in U.S. President Trump's image in Russia, it's been incredibly fast.
It really has.
During his first term, those first 4 years, Moscow seemed mostly disappointed. They saw him as kind of cool towards them.
Yeah. Generally disappointed is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But then the return of a more, let's say, belligerent Donald, combined with the idea that Ukraine might be totally defeated.
That sparked hope.
Incredible hope in many Russians initially. After his inauguration this time, the Kremlin sent some pretty clear signals. They congratulated U.S. President Trump. They showed they were ready to talk.
Not just about Kyiv?
No, not just Kyiv, but also about Russia getting back into the, global financial and political elite. Officially.
And just a few weeks back, Russian politicians, big-name journalists, they were still praising him publicly.
Oh, absolutely. Openly comparing him to Russian President Putin even. Painting U.S. President Trump as this sort of quasi-conservative guy you could deal with.
Maybe even an equal.
Or close to it. Yeah, someone you could do business with.
And Russian President Putin himself, what was his take?
Well, he described a series of phone calls with U.S. President Trump as very constructive. Wished him success back home, said he was ready to cooperate.
Right.
And just this past summer, Russian President Putin said openly that U.S. President Trump, early in his political career, was actually kind of similar to him.
Similar how?
Like a guy who fought the liberal enemy to get power, wanted to steer his country the right way no matter the cost. He called him a courageous guy. One Kremlin aide apparently even said the two leaders were on the same wavelength.
Same wavelength. Meaning
they felt they could maybe sort out Ukraine together, divide up assets, spheres of influence, and at the same time kind of humble the liberal groups across Europe.
Okay, so there was this period of maybe perceived alignment or potential alignment.
Definitely potential.
Now, where does the Russian internet, the Runet, fit into this? That's a huge part of public life there. Did it follow a similar path?
It absolutely did initially. The Runet seemed to embrace U.S. President Trump in much the same way. He was seen as someone who, maybe they disagreed on foreign policy details, but who at least respected or maybe understood Russian nationalism.
Got it. And how did that play out online?
Well, translated internet memes, from Meji sources, from Truth Social, they were huge, really successful.
You mean they spread widely?
All over Russian language sites, and usually alongside comments predicting, the war in Ukraine would end fast, with a truce signed basically on Moscow's terms.
Right. And wasn't there that incident in late February, the report about U.S. President Trump supposedly throwing Zelensky out of the Oval Office?
Oh, yeah. When that story broke, the Runet went wild, ecstatic.
How was it framed?
The perception was that the American president was beating the piglet, castrating Russia's sworn enemy. Really strong stuff.
Okay. But then came the 10-12 days ultimatum.
And everything changed dramatically.
Yeah.
That ultimatum just completely flipped his image online in the Russian-speaking internet space.
Flipped how?
A huge wave of mocking stuff appeared. Just rejecting the ultimatum, demeaning him personally.
Using terms
pretty similar to what they used to use for Joe Biden or Barack Obama. You know, Biden was often mocked as this sort of dazed, powerless old guy.
Right.
And Obama got racist comments called a liberal cuckold. Now, similar tones were being used for U.S. President Trump.
So we have actual examples of this kind of popular creativity.
We do. There's a nationalist influencer, Ivan Kondakov, quite popular. On July 30th, he put out this satirical poem about U.S. President Trump.
Satirical how?
Full of expletives, basically suggesting while everyone else was busy getting things done, U.S. President Trump was just, well, idling, doing nothing useful.
Okay. Any other examples?
Yeah, another one that went viral was an AI-generated image.
Oh.
It shows U.S. President Trump looking really weary, like a patient in a therapist's office.
And the joke is?
The therapist asks, "How long since you last made peace?" And U.S. President Trump replies, "A week ago. I can't do this anymore, doctor. I urgently need to start a war with someone."
So in these kinds of popular artworks or commentaries, he's definitely not the courageous guy Russian President Putin mentioned anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And Russian language media picked up on this trend too, portraying him in memes as, well, a fool.
A fool?
Yeah, or like a useless leader of this huge country who can't make his own decisions, whose statements Russia, being powerful, can just ignore.
And this is reflected in online comments, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's just a flood of derisive comments. Things like, "The ginger lies, Russian President Putin just sent him away," or "Donnie is a loudmouth. He issues ultimatums and then sleeps."
So that powerful image he might have had.
Vanished. Just gone from social media. Replaced by this picture of the perception is a pathetic old president and maybe ready to dance to Russian President Putin's tune. Someone whose tantrums and daily threats are easy to ignore.
Or even laugh at.
Or even easier to laugh at, exactly.
Yeah. Which kind of brings us to the bigger picture, the high-stakes diplomacy angle. There's been this exchange of nuclear pleasantries, as some called it.
Right, the back and forth.
Characterized by some as just, spectacle, not serious. U.S. President Trump reportedly ordered U.S. nuclear subs to appropriate regions.
That was after former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev reminded him about Moscow's nuclear capability, right? And told him to watch The Walking Dead.
That's the one. So how should we read these kinds of dramatic exchanges? Are they just theater?
Well, this particular war of words, it started with U.S. President Trump threatening sanctions if Russia didn't meet his conditions, agreed to that ceasefire in 10 days.
Okay.
And it does seem like both Medvedev's outbursts and U.S. President Trump's responses are largely theatrical. I mean, let's be real. Russia hasn't used nuclear weapons in the last 3 years.
Despite the conflict.
Despite the conflict. And it seems unlikely they deploy them just because of new American sanctions, especially since they've managed to withstand the previous ones. They've adapted economically, found other partners.
And U.S. President Trump himself kind of cast doubt on the sanctions, didn't he? He said something like, "I don't know if they bother Russian President Putin at all."
Exactly, which many see as basically admitting these new sanctions aren't really effective pressure on Russia.
So why announce them?
The perception is it's more about protecting himself from criticism at home. And similarly, that big announcement about sending the nuclear subs, it's seen as largely meaningless because those subs, the ones capable of hitting Russia, they're already out there on duty 24/7. It's standard U.S. Navy procedure.
So it sounds like both Medvedev and U.S. President Trump are maybe trying to look tough for their own domestic audiences.
That seems likely, projecting toughness, playing to the home crowd. But, words do matter.
Especially in this context.
Especially empty threats really have no place when you're talking about something as serious as nuclear war.
Right. And Russian President Putin himself has pushed for a different approach.
He has. He's basically said, look, to get to a peaceful solution, you need real conversations. Substantive ones, and not in public.
But quietly?
Calmly, quietly, through negotiation channels. Now, for any confidential talks like that to even have a chance,
needs to happen.
U.S. President Trump's administration would need a detailed peace plan, first off, and a secure, confidential way to get it to the Russian government.
And on the Russian side,
Moscow would also have to significantly soften its own demands, its own pretty rigid conditions for any kind of peace settlement.
So ultimately, while all this chaos on Russian social media doesn't directly dictate foreign policy,
No, and a lot of it probably never even reaches U.S. President Trump.
a threat in international relations, it has to be credible, right? People have to believe you'll actually follow through.
Absolutely. Credibility is key. Will the politician or the country actually do what they say?
And the more U.S. President Trump seems to swing from one position to another without concrete action against Russia,
The more likely it is that Russian President Putin might just call his bluff, or what he sees as a bluff.
it feels like early in his second term, U.S. President Trump had a real window, maybe.
A prime opportunity, yeah, to show the political will to actually end the fighting in Ukraine, or at least pause it.
Whether through working together or through confrontation.
Right. But the longer he seems to hesitate, the quicker he risks becoming someone the Kremlin just ignores.
And maybe he senses that himself. You mentioned his comment, I don't know if this will affect Russia, about his own ultimatum.
Yeah, it does suggest maybe he subconsciously gets the limits of his own political will here. He might not fully grasp what Moscow will do next.
But the patriotic side of Russian society, the politicians, they seem pretty confident now.
Unprecedentedly confident, it seems. They appear to see U.S. President Trump now as a kind of naked king.
And Russian President Putin.
For them, maybe U.S. President Trump is becoming just another American president to deal with or ignore.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.